Hello, folks, and welcome to the Inked Education Podcast. My name is Dr. Rob Collins, and I'm so thankful that you're here. So at the Inked Education Podcast, our whole goal is to spill ink on the uncovered stories of education and in the classroom. And my guests on this episode are two of my very dear friends, Adam Watson and Colley. Adam is a digital learning consultant with an educational cooperative in Kentucky. He's also the author of the recent tabletop role-playing games in the classroom, infusing gameplay into K-12 instruction. It's a wonderful book. I'm just about 40 pages into it right now. But Adam is a great coach. He's a great educator. He's a great thought partner in what education looks like, especially when we think about role-playing games in education. So I'm excited to have him here as part of the conversation. I'm also really excited to have Colley. Kalli is a regional innovation specialist with the Division of Innovation at the Kentucky Department of Education. Prior to that, she was an educator in Western Kentucky middle grades, English, and social studies. And she is also an alumna of the Kentucky Innovative Teacher Fellowship, which is how she and I met. She's an incredible educator. She brings a lot of life and a lot of fun to the work of teaching our kids. And together, she and Adam are a dynamic duo that have a very nerdy passion about what tabletop role-playing games are and what they look like in the classroom and how that can bring joy both to teachers and to our students. And how amongst this joy, there's also really rich learning of academic standards and skills and dispositions and competencies like we might see in a portrait of a learner. It's a fun conversation. I'm so thankful that they both agreed to be guests on the podcast. I hope you enjoy. Okay. Adam, Kalli, thank you so much for joining us on the Ink podcast. Again, it's a cold, frigid afternoon in Kentucky. How are both of you doing?
Great. Surviving the snow week and excited to talk to some other adults for a change. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic.
Same here. It's a little frozen, surviving the tundra and among warm friends. So we're in the right place.
Indeed. Well, so just a quick elevator pitch. The idea behind the Inked podcast is spilling the ink on untold stories in education, in classrooms. Of course, there's a little piddling about with octopuses as a cool mascot, but that's neither here nor there. So we're here today to talk about tabletop role-playing games and the idea of play in the classroom. So imagining that folks listening to this may not be super well versed in TTRPGs, what's the elevator pitch? And I'll say I'm a D&D fan. I've read quite a few of the novels, some R.A. Salvatore and some Paul S. Kemp, shout out. He's my favorite. And I played Baldur's Gate. But beyond that, like the idea that there are other tabletop role-playing games, I'm not that familiar. So what's the elevator pitch for folks that don't know much about a TTRPG?
Sure. So TTRPG stands for tabletop role-playing games. Basically, I tell people it's collaborative storytelling. So you have some sort of adventure, some sort of challenge or story where friends sit around a table, and that's kind of where the tabletop part comes in. Sometimes there's maps on the table or figures. A lot of times now in the digital age, we have those up on a screen, but the origins were actual tabletop figures and maps. But they're in a shared world. They make decisions. You roll dice to determine outcomes of events and basically improvise your way through quests and problems and try to do what you think your character would do. It's like part board game, part theater, part chaos. And as the great Deborah Ann Wool said, referring to the most well-known TTRPG, Dungeons & Dragons, it's the greatest game ever created, and I'll do it until I die.
Fantastic.
That's what she said about it, and I love it.
Excellent.
Awesome. Yeah. Just quick note, because you mentioned Deborah Ann Wool. She's the blonde lady. She's been in like True Blood, right?
Yes, and she was also
Yes.
into Marvel
Okay.
stuff as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have seen the clip of her playing D&D with, is it John Bernthal?
Yes. That very clip has come into some of our training, actually, believe it or not.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, it is a wonderful testimony to the power of storytelling and just how it can hook you immediately. And Kalli, I find that really interesting that the idea of storytelling is what you mentioned first, not that it's a game where you're like collecting points or winning, right? It's about the story and the journey. So super interested to talk more about how that works in the classroom. But first, I have to know each of you clearly has some nerdy history with tabletop
Yes.
RPGs or D&D perhaps. So Adam, we'll start with you. What's your history in the TTRPG world?
Well, as I often share, I shared in my book and I share in our PDs often in the beginning. I am almost exactly as old as Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons started going in boxes of their first 1,000 boxes and shipping out to the world in January of 1974. I was born in February 1974. We're like siblings, barely separated. So it was in the 80s when I was around 10 that I had a relative who was like, "You like science fiction? I think you'd like this thing." And I was like, "Well, what's that? And what's this game?" And the game is called Star Frontiers. It was a tabletop role playing game made by TSR. TSR being the original parent company of Dungeons and Dragons. So that was really my first role playing game, and I loved it. And from that, it was kind of the gateway RPG. From there, I played Dungeons and Dragons, of course, and then other ones, played several for several years. And so that was kind of my launch as far as tabletop role playing games. What's sometimes difficult with tabletop role playing games is finding a group of friends and the scheduling monster, as we sometimes joke about, right? Like that's the hardest adversary of all, is finding when can 5 of us all get together on the same night and do a thing or whatever. Well, as I got older, life intervened and other interests happened. And so a lot of those things literally got put in a bin and put aside for quite a bit, became a teacher. Always felt like there was aspects of it that had some intriguing. It was always a happy, positive, joyful memory for me, a very vibrant memory of mine growing up. And so there were some aspects and pieces that I did, but in the end, it was really one of those things that kind of vicariously, I would come across a random article about maybe someone that did tabletop role-playing games for therapy, for example, or every now and then a teacher. And I started collecting those, and there was a point in time later into my career where I was like, man, it would be fun to put all these in a place, maybe for the benefit of others to learn from, and it would be good to seek out people that I think are doing this, which was kind of, taking that Field of Dreams approach. If you build it, they will come,
Right, yeah.
hoping that they would. And so that led to, is like I looked for a website that was kind of in the K-12 space, found pieces and other players, but not really that. And I was like, well, be the change you want to see in the world. So I, with the help of a Google site and a template, I launched Kentucky Educators for Role-Playing Games, started putting those resources, advocating and celebrating friends that were doing it. And that was in 2022. All that said, I have to say this is a good place to pass the baton here, because I didn't really have the opportunity to go deeply or well about tabletop role-playing in the classroom, unlike my colleague, Kalli. So I'm going to pass the baton to her story.
Fantastic.
So I am a former athlete. I played soccer all through college. But now that I'm a female in my 30s in a small town, no one shockingly wants to play soccer anymore. And I would probably also hurt myself if I tried. So long story short, I needed a hobby. And through some good friends of mine, I discovered D&D. I love playing board games and game nights with friends. I also love stories. I've always loved to read. And so I was immediately sucked in because this is such a great combination of both. I also found as we were playing really quickly that I was applying a lot of the skills that I wanted my students to have. So I'm having to communicate. I'm having to think critically. I'm having to communicate clearly, use math, read carefully. I'm being creative. I'm writing about all these characters. Like I'm studying history, albeit of fictional history, but still, like I'm doing all these skills that I wanted my students to have. And so that year I made it my mission to start implementing small things from the game into the classroom. So it could be small things like rolling a die to have students answer a question or different things like that. But gradually, as I implemented more of those components of the game, I became braver and eventually wrote my own campaign for 6th grade social studies called Tombs and Pyramids, about ancient Egypt. And then the second one was called Dynasties and Dragons for ancient China. And pun intended, it was a game changer for me. I was completely sold on their place in the classroom. And the very next year, unfortunately for my big plans I had for the classroom, I actually stepped into a new role with KDE. But fortunately for me, it gave me the opportunity to really share this work with other people. And kind of that story was I was showing our division director, Sarah Snipes, the Tombs and Pyramids game, and she immediately was like, oh my gosh, I have to connect you with Adam Watson. I can't believe you're doing this work. And I wasn't pretentious enough to think that I was the only person doing this work. As people on Reddit often say, like Google is helpful sometimes. I probably could have Googled it and found the Kentucky at RPG website, but I didn't really know of anybody else at the time. So my partnership with Adam really opened my eyes to this community across the state. So,
And it was so fortuitous because that was exactly the riding a wave of enthusiasm and discovery and excitement that, you find one person, you think, okay, one is a one off, right? Like maybe that's
Mm.
just a bizarre, then a second, well, maybe that's just a coincidence. But by the time I found a third, fourth, and fifth person, that's when I realized there's something here. And so when Kalli came in the picture, yes, on my side of the fence, once I can almost in my mind, blazing letters, remember Sarah Snipes' email where she was like, listen, I think I found your educational soulmate. Like this is the
yes.
person we met and talked and I was so excited. Really, the best thing, there's so many wonderful things and qualities about Kalli as a person and an educator. But the thing I really love in this space to talk about and brag on her about is that she really does and did it, right? Like
Mm.
that was so practical and important as I found friends, talked about him, wrote about him in articles or in my book. The idea of not just something theoretical, wouldn't it be nice if she did
Yeah.
it, she iterated, like did it once and say, okay, here's things I can do differently and did it again. All the good educator stuff based and steeped in academic rigor, et cetera. So that's why I was so proud because it was a brilliant case study, example of this is possible, this works. And Kalli was a living breathing example of that.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of an issue with like consultant land, right? Like, there's so many folks have really incredible ideas, but that actual classroom practice, folks are removed from that space, right?
Right.
Kalli, it's awesome to hear that you did the thing, right?
Mhm.
I also have to pick out, I really love, you mentioned starting small. And in our spaces, we talk a lot about like simple shifts, right? You
Sure.
can try something that is a bit more innovative in small little bites before you find that bravery to really jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I did not start from 0 to campaign. It was small steps,
Hmm.
one little thing, then the next little thing that led me to that. So, absolutely.
Awesome. So, in thinking of small steps and really the classroom experience as well, I'm very interested in this idea of play in the classroom. And we hear, the phrase the power of play quite often. So if I could get just like a large idea of what do we mean when we talk about the power of play in the classroom, and then perhaps we'll dig a bit deeper into how how you implement play meaningfully and deeply in a classroom setting.
Well, Rob, is this a good place to talk about kind of like game-based learning versus gamification in the kind of talk of this?
I think so. Yeah, and
Okay.
we can unveil the curtain a little bit, right? Like, so we had to talk a bit about, I always think of project-based learning, and there's a very clear delineation between doing a project at the end of a unit as sort
Mhm.
of, the cherry on top, where you do all this learning and then you sort of catalyze it or show it off, sometimes in a surface way with a project, versus project-based learning, which is really the idea of you actually learn through doing the project and it's embedded the entire unit is the work of that project. And I think gamification versus game-based learning, at least in my limited knowledge at this moment, that seems like a similar or an analogous phenomenon. Would that be fair to say?
Very fair. We talk about that in our Dungeons and Desk series. We, kind of use that same analogy,
Hmm.
the dessert versus the main course, the dessert being the project at the end, if you have time.
Yeah.
One of the things that you would be mindful of and careful of is the idea of like the stop, drop, and game phenomenon. That's not what this is about, or it's a
Hmm.
time filler killer. Not that I'm against pure play or against purely playing a game. And, as a side note to that, there are certainly, I would argue, value in learning that happens, even if it's an extracurricular game club where people are, say,
Hmm.
for example, playing D&D. All that said, back to your point, and I think to make sure that there's some structure, pedagogy, and rigor to it, what we talk about often is that, gamification is kind of that icing on the cake, right? So it's elements. It's the shopper's reward card at your favorite grocery that you buy, and for every dollar you get some fuel points. So it
Hmm.
makes it feel a little bit more fun, right? But no one will actually pretend that the grocery experience is an actual game. No one's health bars and dodging fruit or anything like that. So
Right.
depending on where you shop,
It'd be cool if they did, though.
it
I
would be
mean,
cool if they did.
yeah,
It may have felt like that this last week as people got stocked up for a storm.
in the
Uh,
dairy aisle for sure, the milk and
Absolutely,
bread.
where the milk
Absolutely.
sandwiches are made. Yes.
Yes.
Gamification is kind of flavoring and an additive, if you will. But in game-based learning, you're actually playing the game, and the game is important for the learning. So that is a distinction we make. What I'm always mindful about is there are times where that feels a little bit judgmental or
Hmm.
hierarchical. And the thing that I think you always have to remind yourself pedagogically is what was your objective, right? Like if some sprinkling and flavoring, but your objective was met and at the time, and everyone understands what that was for and what was about, the teacher in particular who designed the instructional experience, great.
Hmm.
But, game-based learning, I think the argument could certainly be made that it allows for a deeper, more immersive experience, and that's the value of the time invested to make it and design it and plan it, and the time and the experience of it. But they all have their place. They all have their moments of what you're trying to meet and what objectives you're trying to reach and how those things interact and intermingle. So, play-based learning, the only thing I'd say about that too is just play to me. There's so much value in it. There's so much studies about it. It's such a shame that we feel like, basically after fifth grade in a K through 12 American experience, like you're done, like recess is over, no more of that recess stuff. When we
Yeah.
know that play is so important to brain development, I find it fascinating that some northeastern states, a few of them have actually passed legislation saying that basically mandating play, like these young kids in particular, especially,
Hmm.
need more of it, not less. Games to me is just, if you had 15 or less seconds, it's like games are just structured play. Right?
Yeah,
Certain rules are established and things are done. And so that's the power and the interplay of those things.
for sure. I appreciate the idea you pose about goals, right? Like, what is your goal for the time? And I also like the idea of almost lowering the bar for entry into a particular learning topic. I'll say this for my own experience lately. I'm trying to learn to code. So I've moved into a new role and I'm really learning data analysis. I'm trying to
Mm,
learn Python. So I've been
good for you.
finding it's really fun because I've found gamified experiences that are allowing me to
Mhm.
jump into this world of syntax and conditional
Yes.
formatting that
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to have had I just been given a book, right? And I'm a voracious reader, but there's just a different bar for entry there that plays to kind of what I need at the moment. So anyway, reflecting that experience back a little bit from what you just
Mhm.
said, I think shout out to Code Combat, I think is the name of the app.
You're
Excellent.
making Rob into a Python phenomenon. That's what you're doing out there, Code Combat.
Well, we certainly hope. We shall see.
We shall see.
Add
We
it
shall
to your
see.
list of titles.
Yes, yes.
The inside joke there.
Inside joke.
We will tackle that after the camera stops. So, Callie,
Yes.
speaking of former coworkers,
Good segue.
so yeah, right. So you and your team of regional innovation specialists are doing incredible work across the Commonwealth of Kentucky, from east to west, north to south. Truly incredible. And a lot of it is focused on vibrant learning experiences, right? And how we can make learning experiences more meaningful, more community connected, more engaging for students in the classroom. So really in this question, I'm interested in, when you think of a vibrant learning experience, what does that look like? And how does something like a TTRPG in the classroom really allow that to flourish?
Sure. So, what you just mentioned in the question, like that long definition of vibrant learning. So, partnering with families and communities, students having agency, engaging in relevant, authentic, joyful learning opportunities, honoring their cultural wealth interests, all the things,
Hmm.
applying their knowledge to those personalized products. But I love the short definition, which is learning that matters to students. And I think when we look at, I love the long definition too, but when we really look at the short definition, when we try to create experiences that matter to them, we're able to break down that definition and see a lot of the correlation between TTRPGs and vibrant learning. So just like when we think about TTRPGs, I think about agency. So that ability to make the decisions in the game. I get to decide what my character does. I get to decide what happens in the story. The engagement. So kind of going back to the gamification topic, they are engaged. They're playing a game, but there's that distinction between some of the short burst dopamine type games where I do a thing, I get a reward. I do a thing, I get a reward. Whereas I think a game like Dungeons and Dragons or any TTRPG is sustained engagement where they having to work through challenges over time. They're having to collaborate. They're having to wrestle with ideas or topics or ethics or challenges or puzzles. They're going to experience some setbacks and have some failures. Maybe they roll a bad roll and they have to deal with what happens after. But they're having to persist before they see success or get a reward. And so I think that sustained engagement is important to note. When we look at the definition of vibrant learning, we see, frankly, a ton of things in the exemplary category of the Danielson framework. So, things
Mm,
that we're looking for in a classroom, we see directly in games like Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop games in the classroom. So, I think that authenticity, where students are applying things that they know, the relevance to them. The example I love to give about relevance is when we were doing Tombs and Pyramids, I actually had their roles be, instead of like a wizard or a bard or whatever, they were playing social class roles from that time period. So you might
mm,
have a scribe or a peasant, and a lot of games for the classroom are set up that way. I have never seen students dig into roles in society and learn more about them than they did when they were creating their characters, because what they
Mm,
were learning about the role in society mattered to their game and their character. So they
mm,
wanted to know what their daily life was like. They wanted to know what they would have worn or what they would have done, or, what their job was day to day. And so when the things that they're doing in the game directly, or the things that they're learning directly apply to the things they're doing in the game, that's where that relevance sprouts up and that
mm.
learning really sticks. And so I could speak on that all day long, but also I mentioned earlier the competencies and the skills that you have in the game, the collaboration, communication, things that you would see on a profile of a graduate or a portrait of a learner.
Mhm.
But also, as Adam mentioned, there are people that are playing these games in therapy sessions, and there's a huge social emotional aspect to unpack that we don't even have time for today. So, the
Right.
competencies, the learning, the relevance, it all is what makes it vibrant and matter to the students. I mean, it makes it stick with them long beyond the experience that they've had. It's just one way that teachers can innovate and incorporate vibrant learning and competency skills into their practice.
Absolutely. And I'm so interested in what you had built in the classroom. Uh,
Yeah.
and so this is kind of a follow-up.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in that idea of agency for students.
mm.
So how did you build agency for your students in that particular game? Tombs and Pyramids, was it?
Yes. Tombs and pyramids.
What did agency look like for those kids in that particular game that you had built?
Yeah. So they got to choose their role in society. And I tried to group them up into, there had to be one person from each social class in your party.
Hmm.
And so they got to create their own character. They got to design it, write their own backstory, give their name, that sort of thing, which really creates that buy-in immediately,
Yeah.
of this is my character that I created. And then within the game, there were challenges all along the way that really highlighted each social class. So the first one really gave the peasant a chance to shine. They got
Okay. Yeah.
proficiency bonus on, farming, because it was all about having to divert waters that are flooding from the Nile. They're flooding this village. So they had to figure out a way to not flood the village with the water. And so they had to come up with knowledge that they had learned from class, but they could do it multiple different ways. So really figuring out, and there were how many ever groups in the classroom, and every group solved the problem maybe a little bit differently depending
Yeah.
on what we had done in class and what they had learned. So every challenge opened up a door for them to have a collaborative conversation about, how do we want to solve this? If we're going to ask a person in the village for different tools, or are we going to try to do it this way? And so those choices in the game, if you really let go and allow them to creatively think about how they want to approach it, it makes them feel empowered, and it makes them feel like they can apply their learning in fresh ways.
Absolutely. And that's so, of course, the deeper learning movement is coalesced with the vibrant learning movement. And that's really the idea of application of
Yes.
knowledge, skills, and dispositions, right? Which is exactly what you're describing. I
Yeah.
have learned something based on an authentic role I've been given, and I get to implement that.
Yes.
That's brilliant.
And those light bulbs to be able to say, "Oh my gosh, we learned about irrigation channels. What was it that we learned about that? And how did
Yeah.
they do
Yeah.
that? And how can we do that here? And what does that look like?" And so yeah, that application was so great because you could see not only that they were applying what they were learning, but during the sessions, which I also want to squash the myth that when we do things like this, like vibrant learning, there's no direct instruction going on. Like,
Hmm.
you're still having to teach content. Obviously, there are still key things, core knowledge that students have to have. And so, but when that knowledge is taking place, when those times of learning are happening, you're able to say, hey guys, you may need to know this. Your party is going to need to know this information for
Yeah.
tomorrow for the game. So there's a level of engagement and note taking and things like that, that it just raises the bar on that a little bit.
For sure. It's all scaffolded by high quality instruction, high quality materials behind that
Yes,
instruction. And then
absolutely.
I'm just tickled by the idea that every kid has a moment to shine in the way that you
Yes.
design the
Yes.
game, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh no, this is your moment to take it and run with it.
Yeah. You're the
Wait,
peasant. You know the most about, farming. You're the priest. You know the most
right.
about religion. We're about to enter this God's temple, like in the pyramid. Like you would be the one to know about this. So,
Not
yeah,
usually the nicest thing to say to a kid. You're the peasant,
you're the
but
peasant. I know.
I like the use case for
They
it.
loved it.
Sure.
They loved it.
Right. It's just echoing, hammering home that application idea, like you as we've been talking about, is when you have content that could possibly be considered important yet dry facts that are untethered to my life, maybe in general, but certainly if you add 10,000, right? But suddenly, if that is the thing that if I don't understand this well and apply that knowledge at the right moment at the right time, it's not even just me, it's my party in the sense of the other friends, right? The other three people and I in this group on this adventure together, will suffer the consequences, quite natural consequences. And so there's all that wonderful interplay too, that
Yeah.
natural, authentic, that knowledge means something and I have to apply that knowledge in a game environment. And that's also a wonderful chef's kiss to that kind of experience.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
also want to just point out really quickly that there are some barriers and hoops to jump through in a classroom that sometimes you feel like deter you from doing this sort of work. So,
Mm,
in the classroom that I was in, we were having, we had the PLC process and we had to do the same assessments as the social studies teachers, across the hall.
right.
And so I'm bound to do this multiple choice assessment that I really didn't want to do, but I have to do it. I have to play ball and I have to assess my students and their knowledge. So I totally understand.
Mhm.
So how do you do that and also keep it vibrant and in the context of the game? So different things like I would add, I called them mastery advantages. So when you mastered the content, you could earn advantages in the game. So the
Mm,
Mm.
scribe, when he mastered, the first mastery quiz, which was a common formative assessment, he was able to earn papyrus and ink for the game, which was actually paper and pencil. So you couldn't
oh,
take notes as the scribe for the game until you earned the papyrus and ink. So
that's
the
awesome.
motivation for wanting to master content and you can't get the rope as the, whatever role until you mastered this content. And so it gamified little things that maybe feel unpleasant and made it a little better to get through.
For sure. And I just have to imagine that your students, your young people were well prepared for those more traditional assessments through the rich, vibrant learning that you had built for them. We could talk about this all night. I mean, genuinely, kudos to you. This sounds lovely.
Thank you.
I would
Thank you.
have loved to experience it as a learner myself. So it's just now 2026. Somehow it has been a long year already with the cold and the ice and the snow, but I am interested. I'll preface it like this. On the Ink podcast, I always ask my guests, what's the best learning experience that you have ever had as a learner yourself? And I think we'll twist that a little bit given the topic of TTRPGs. And I want to ask the both of you, looking back on 2025, what was the best learning experience related to a TTRPG that you got to see or experience yourselves across that entire year? So just a quick story about what that experience was, where you saw it, kind of what the highlights were.
Can I go first?
You
All right.
may.
All right. I will then. I'm thankful that you focused us on a year and in the last year and recent and all the things.
Hmm.
So in that sense, let me just pull out and share one classroom story I wrote about recently at the Next Generation Learning Challenges. And I pulled back, and although it's a highlight and a celebration of this particular teacher I'm about to talk about for a minute, it, of course, puts it in the context of what's good that's going on here. What do you get out of TTRPGs in an educational setting? Okay. I was able to visit a high school and visit the classroom of Sterling Harris. Sterling Harris, shouting out to him, the STEM Magnet High School in Jefferson County Public Schools. And I knew Sterling already. And What's interesting about it is that you see all these pieces falling into place. Sterling is relatively my age and played TTRPGs, has for years, plays it on in his free time, enjoys them, always looking for aspects and opportunities. Ran in a couple of different counties, even coming up to Jefferson County, did the extracurricular club thing, which, of course, that again, I want to emphasize that learning happens. Social emotional learning is wonderful. Bonds, relationships are enriched, lots of value. And knowing that value, he wanted to see how can we capitalize and keep moving it forward. So when he first came to Western, he did another version or variation of that extracurricular club, although it wasn't necessarily outside of school hours for a lot of reasons of equity, right? Because
Mm,
what about
Mhm.
transportation? And you're asking teachers to stay an extra hour, all those things. Western has, like several do, has programs and ways of like, how do we fold that club hour, if you will, inside? So they called it
right.
a flex course, as they're calling of it. And so lots of different options. A Dungeons and Dragons flex course was one of them. All right, that went well. And then he thought, well, I think I'm going to try to see if I can do a creative writing class with D&D. And again, he'd be the first to say, and I'm saying it as Callie said earlier, that's on a silo. And I've even visited classrooms of other friends that have done similar work. But let's
Hmm.
keep on Sterling. So Sterling went with that idea. Of course, he was going to ground it in the journey to success skills of Jefferson County Public Schools. Of
Hmm.
course, he was going to make it academically rich and rigorous, et cetera. And with that, caveat, the principal said, please continue. And so he started that class. So when I came in October, it was the first semester, 3 months into the school year with this first course. And it was lovely. He'd really had some great systems and he was figuring it out as we all do sometimes along the way, figuring out how to tweak it and make it better. But basically he would have some groups be playing an actual D&D game. And then this group over here would be writing, creative writing. And then on a different day, that would switch up. And, if you were on a writing day, now you're playing. There was a great cycle that happened because students, when they were playing, would have opportunities to enrich their imagination, to hear great descriptions that their fellow players said, like, well, that's a good way of putting it.
Mm,
And that could go back to on writing day, pull that into their writing. But they're also motivated to write because if you were behind on your deadline, so to speak, or what you're supposed to accomplish in your narrative up to that point, you couldn't play. So you're really motivated to make sure to keep writing. And the
mm,
virtuous cycle of that, right? So what I play helped me write. And by writing, it's going to also help me make sure that I can play. And anyway, so lots of props about doing those things. They rolled characters at the start of the year. And so, yes, they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but there's literally an academic, poster with academic standards that you can see the narrative things that he is accomplishing and holding himself accountable to. The last thing I'll say about it that was wonderful to see is that they had, surprise, surprise, they had several people from this flex course that were like, oh, I got to take this class. All right. So he had some
yeah.
people on the roster pretty quick. Well, they became kind of the experts of the game, whereas there was lots of people in the room that never played D&D or any tabletop role-playing game at all. So
Hmm.
different levels there. But the people that were more experienced who leaned in helped at the very beginning, like let's do a little just scenario just so you can see what it's like and the rolling of the dice and things like that. When I came the day that I came to observe, there was a student-led group. In other words, a student dungeon master leading his group of players. And so I'm going to come back. That's my way of ending my story is just say, you talk about agency. Nothing is more wonderful
Mhm.
than seeing this young man standing up, leading these group of students through his adventure and experience as confidently as anything I could ever do as a
Yeah.
51, 52-year-old almost dungeon master myself. So it was all the interplay of all the things you would ever want, not least of which their journey to success skills and the artifacts that he's so excited that they're going to be creating. Certainly a narrative, like a short story, sure, those things.
Right.
But also, here's my character sheet. And why is this character who's now level 8 is so important to my story? Because when I first started, dot, dot, dot. I mean, there's lots of very rich, authentic opportunities out of that. And so I'm excited to see how that continues.
Fantastic. So you've shared about this on Next Generation Learning Challenges, you
I
said?
did. I published it
Okay.
just a few weeks ago. Yes. Hmm.
Awesome. We'll have to link that when
Yeah,
we share this episode. Awesome.
absolutely.
Excited to read more and kudos to Sterling. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Great, great,
Yeah.
great teacher.
Callie, I'm tickled to hear what you have to share.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's been our Dungeons and Desks PD that we've had all across the state in the last year. Adam and I have partnered together to do a PD at the co-ops, and we've been able to share in several different locations already. I have to give credit where it's due. Adam is an absolute wealth of knowledge. I have learned a ton from him. His work collecting examples, building the frameworks, doing the research, gathering resources has truly made this PD something that has kind of come alive. The response has been really exciting. And there have been teachers that have come with maybe just like an inkling of this could be cool, or maybe I'm mildly interested, but then they leave with inspiration and ideas and practical tools. And I feel like teachers are leaving feeling empowered to do the work and like it can be done. It's not, we don't have to eat the elephant in one bite kind of thing. Like
Right.
there is an entry point for everyone. If you're super jazzed about this and you've been playing TTRPGs since the 80s, this is for you. If you didn't even know what it was before you came here today, this is for you too. And so we've heard examples of teachers that are already implementing their ideas or planning for ideas for next year. And I just feel so fortunate to be Adam's sidekick in this all, and I'll keep tagging along as long as he'll have me. So
You
having
got
a
to
front
get,
row
we,
seat.
let's stop for just a second. Kalli is very awesome. And the thing that I cannot emphasize, I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. The thing that's awesome is that when we need to have a moment where it's like, did I, who really did it? And not just like 27 years ago, but like a year ago. Yeah, Exhibit A, Kalli Colley, everybody. So she is wonderful, wonderful facilitator, a deep learner, and most importantly, perhaps in this context, a person actually has been the practitioner of it. So value to her too.
Well, just
Mutual
having-
Admiration Society.
Yeah, having a front row seat to learn from Adam and also just see all the teachers like get so excited about the work has been a lot of fun this year. And if you had told me a couple years ago that this would be something I get to do, I would have told you that you were crazy, because this is just, yeah. So,
Listen,
I think the thing there's two quick things I'd say is I love that people come with some healthy skepticism. I think that's important. And they should come with like, whether they knew anything or not about tabletop role playing games, stroking the chin of, I don't know. I mean, how is that going to work? You need to have that healthy skepticism, because there's going to be other people. Even if you walk away from it as a true believer, you have the right, or rather other people have the right to ask you, is this academically rigorous? Are we just playing games here? What's going on? And to be able to back that up with, this is what we're doing, this is our objective, this is my intentionality, important. The second thing is, and that's something that I've learned, I think, a little bit, just to pull back and give both of you really credit on the vibrant learning train, is the idea that we've really tapped into a bigger zeitgeist moment of educators are just really hungry for something a little bit more joyous and a little bit more fulfilling for themselves as much as for their students. It's not that, we didn't always realize that. But I think in a world where we realize, it's a yes and not either or, of course, as far as academic school has a purpose. But how can we just bring some zip and zing into it? And this, as sometimes it might sound a little bit wackadoodle, as they might say, it's something that I think a lot of people come in with that, and that's always fun. They're really eager at the end of the day just to find something. And that's what we always tell them. There's frameworks, there's options, there's models that you could choose to emulate or follow. At the end of the day, if your joy is just a little bit bigger and better, and so is your students, then that's the win.
Absolutely. That's huge. Tapped a special interest of mine. So I always look at the chart of student engagement and how after third grade it just craters, right?
Yeah.
And continues to do so until we see that tick up in 12th grade, right? When we're almost flying the coop, as it were. And that's a distressing trend to me, the idea that so many children are not enjoying school meaningfully. But that's also true for educators, right? We see that our turnover and retention rates are suffering. And I think, of course, it's not the fix for a system that needs a lot of help, but the idea that not only young people are enjoying their classrooms, but the adults in the classrooms are having fun too, are joyful in their everyday work. I think there's something so powerful there that can't be discounted. That the idea that, yes, we want academic rigor. Yes, we want growth grounded in really meaningful knowledge and skills. But we also need some element of fun. There must be joy to combat what sometimes feels joyless, right? Or at least in the cultural milieu, is folks think of school and they're like, oh, that wasn't very fun. And that's just a tragedy. And I know that folks sitting in classrooms that are doing work like you've described today in Sterling's class or Kalli in your class a few years ago, I know you were experiencing joy, but I know your kids were too. And I think that's so powerful and meaningful.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to go on a tangent there a little bit.
No, it was a good
Love it.
tangent. Could agree more. And by the way, let's just point out, you said, after third, fourth grade, you start seeing it go down. Is it a coincidence that fifth grade recess is over? Now it's serious secondary silo time, like first period, second period. Like we've got bells now. None of this fun stuff. We don't got
Right.
time for fun stuff. We got to master X, Y, and Z. So
Yeah.
If we could do it in pieces and bits, at least, how can we bring that joy back?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a gradual process, right? It must needs be in a system like K-12, PK-12 even. But I think we're making progress. And I know Kentucky is. I'm so immensely proud of Kentucky and the work that's happened across the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what sells this when teachers come to the PD and they have the opportunity to play and they see themselves in the game and they see how their students could react. We get to share examples. If you've never let your kids roll a D20 and they roll a 5 and you say, sorry, you fell down the trap door, and they're like,
Yeah.
there's that shared experience of you can't not smile. You can't not laugh when things like that happen. And then to see their successes when they roll a 20 and they're celebrating as a class, that joy is really, I think, what ultimately sells people on this.
Yeah.
When they get the opportunity to try it out and find themselves in the work.
Certainly. And so on the idea of selling this, let's say folks have been sold oh, I want to try this in my classroom. That brings me to the question, someone wants to take the first step. What might they do? Where might they find some resources? What is a first step into integrating a TTRPG into your classroom? And there may or may not be an Amazon link posted here soon. So yeah, there's my question. What's your first step if you're a teacher wanting to implement a TTRPG?
Well, there's 215 pages, and that might take a minute. So let's just cut to the code, the Python inside of the book, if you will.
Sure.
There are one of the things that I felt was an honest question, and I wanted to make sure I gave something in the book, not only because there's a takeaway, but also practicality. How do we take the theory and when the rubber hits the road, do a thing? So in that sense, in the book, early in, I talk about 2 frameworks that help make it happen. And then the rest of the book is really, even by chapters, an idea of, and here's examples of that, what that might look like, and so on. So two frameworks. The first one is called depth of infusion. And if we want to use a water metaphor, we can think of that as the pool and how deeply you want to wade in, right? So the first level of that depth of infusion is called an adjacent infusion, which is basically like the extracurricular club. It's a thing that happens probably closer to pure gameplay of a TTRPG experience. And it happens in school grounds with school educators and all the things, the library, et cetera. However, no one has learning targets on a wall. It's that. So that's adjacent. But the next 3 are inside of a classroom, inside of the box, if you will. So the next level in is called an elemental infusion. And that is a great another word, one that Kalli used earlier, is aspect, right? An aspect of TTRPGs, but not a playing of a full game. So that could be as simple as, you roll a die and, I rolled a 17. That means that Javier speaks, right? Next level in is episodic infusion. And that's where you start going from the icing of the cake to the cake, right? So that's where you maybe play a one shot, much like the Dynasty and Dragons and the examples of that. So it might be over a period or a day or a couple 3, but there's some finite block of time where begin, middle, end. Okay. And you might do a few of those. You might have that once a unit or a couple of times. But as you start developing where it starts becoming almost like the thing that kids are expecting every unit, or it starts building out to the point where the course's DNA almost feels like it's infused with it. Well, my friends and neighbors, that's the last one, and that's a full infusion. And that would be like the Sterling Harris example that we've been talking about, where, hey, it's in the title. There's no fool in here. If we start with rolling up a character, writing that backstory, learning from those aspects and how to use descriptive language. And we actually play the game and then cycle back and forth and reflect, debrief how that went. We take journal entries, all of the things, but it's pretty much a wall-to-wall experience. And that's the deepest end. But again, as Kalli said, that phrase too, it's picking your aspect, right? I think that it's great to have an episodic infusion and certainly, sure, go for the full infusion, but you may just start off with the character sheet activity. Take this D&D or pick your game system here, insert game system here. Take this character sheet and fill it out as if it's a famous explorer or a person in history or a literary character. And then here's the key thing, defend it. Because one of the things that we haven't necessarily said out loud, but I think is so beautiful about this, is that there are so many analog aspects of this experience. And frankly, a little bit of Not that you could ever be AI proof, but certainly AI resistant
Hmm.
if you do the full thing. So the character sheet experience, I'll be honest with you, AI is great. If you said, make me a AI sheet like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons and do all the character ability scores for Marco Polo. Well, it'll do it. It probably not even a terrible one. Like it kind of half
Mm.
makes sense. It'll defend it, but that's AI doing all the lift for you. If it's depending on you and the activity, that's just the first half, or maybe not even that. The most important part is tell me why his strength is a 17. Tell me why he needs an astrolabe or whatever. That is the secret sauce, right?
Right.
So, okay, depth of infusion. The other framework is a facilitation question. Degree of facilitation is the framework name. And that's looking at the experience and saying, how do you manage it? In a classroom setting, because a typical tabletop role playing game experience is there's a game master, a dungeon master. We're going on this adventure. I'm playing all the other roles that happen. I'm kind of I take care of the rules and make decisions, but it's me and then 4 to 6 other players. I don't know if you've been in a classroom in America anytime in the last 10 seconds, but you probably noticed the classroom sizes are usually pretty bigger than 4 to 6, right? So in a 25, 30 classroom, what do? Kalli has some great examples and stories, even from her own experience, of how she did that. But quickly, the
Hmm.
facilitation is none, because it's that character sheet activity. There's no game being played. So that's easy. No facilitation. Check. Next one up is an auto GM experience. And that's an experience where there's some structure where the kids can be self-managed and monitored in their groups without you running around like crazy or having a kid know all the things. And
Hmm.
maybe it's a slide deck. Maybe it's a certain game or whatever. A choose your own adventure kind of digital platform experience, a random event table. Next level up is it's educator led. In some way or form or fashion, I am the GM and I'm managing this experience for the kiddos. And last but not least is a student GM experience, kind of the pinnacle, ideally, which is that
Hmm.
student leaders kind of emerge in the most agentic form and that they're managing these groups of these adventures. There's a degree of complexity about that for sure, but in each of those examples, I talk about those examples in the book for the facilitation, for each of those depths of infusion of adjacent, elemental, episodic, and full, whole chapters to be devoted to each of those infusions of here's examples of how you can do it, and here's examples of real teachers that have. So it's picking an entry point. It's picking a
Hmm.
point where you think that you can do it and hopefully flourish from there. Get encouraged enough that you ideate and try something else next time.
Absolutely. That's so practical ways to jump in. And if you get the book, hold on, tabletop role playing games in the classroom, infusing gameplay into K-12 instruction.
Yes,
There we go. Available at fine book retailers everywhere.
absolutely.
So you're walking through those frameworks with folks throughout the book, and they can really decide, hey, I want to try this and get to it. That's awesome. This has been lovely. Thank the both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for having us.
I'm interested in the incredible duo the two of you are. Do you have more learning series planned for the future, or what does that look like?
Go ahead, Kalli. Tell them.
Yes. So I will take the March one and you can talk about the June one because that one's really exciting as well. So
Okay, gotcha.
we have another Dungeons and Desks session at GREC in March on March 17th. So wear your green so we don't pinch you. We won't pinch you. But it is on March 17th, Dungeons and Desks at GREC, and it'll be the same series that we've done a lot of the other co-ops this year. So a lot of things that we talked about today, just how to implement examples of implementation, resources, the framework. Adam will talk about that a lot. We will do that. You will have the opportunity to play a tabletop role-playing game
Mhm.
and leave with all the things. So,
And
yes,
it's
that's
again
coming up in March.
a full day and free. That's the important thing to
Yes,
stress.
yes, yes,
Full
yes.
day
There you
free.
go.
Come wherever you're at, even if outside of Kentucky. We once, for one of our sessions, had someone drive all the way from Cleveland to
Oh,
come
wow.
down to our sessions. Or, come all. The other thing we'll tease up just a little bit is that Kalli and I are partnering up with the Fraser History Museum, and we're doing an experience in June, a couple-day workshop that we're going to focus specifically with social studies as
Mm.
a content. In social studies, teachers, using the tabletop role-playing game experience. So it allows us to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive to talk about that one content area, talk about place-based learning,
Right.
like we're literally in a museum where the things are. Of course, Kalli, as we've said several times, social studies middle school teachers. So a lot of opportunity there. More information, registration, that's going to come in another month or two, but it's a good opportunity to kind of just be on the lookout for that. But March 17th, the registration for our Dungeons and Desk is available, and a good place to go to get the flyer, some previous testimonials of people that have come from previous sessions, and the registration link. You can go to kyedrpg.com and go to the events page.
Fantastic. And we'll share all that in the show notes and on the post with this as well. So this has been a joy and a gift. Kalli, Adam, always a pleasure. Thankful to have the friendship of the both of you, but also the tremendous force that both of you are for education in Kentucky. So thank you, and until we chat again.